Hi, Saliah.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
It's really nice having you here.
Thank you for having me.
So as I told you before, this is an interview for my business module.
Mhm.
I just wanted to let you know that I will record both the video and the audio of this interview. If that's all right with you?
Yeah, perfect. No worries.
Okay, that's fine. All right. So the next set of questions will be: I just want to know more about you, how you conduct your business, and then specifically clients, customer retention, how you make clients into your advocates and referrals. So let's start with you. What interests you in the creative fields and what made you start into this field?
What interested me about the creative field is, I guess, to begin with, I had a lot of influence from my family, all of whom mostly work in the creative fields, whether that be architecture or interior design. So I always had that influence. And I think just the way that you could create something and kind of see like a physical object at the end of it, or like a physical print, or whatever it may be. And I was kind of like balancing between going into the creative industry or going into the fitness industry, and I really wanted something that was flexible and that I could take and carry around the world with me. And I guess that I felt creativity would do that the most, would give me more opportunity to do that. And just knowing that it's always in demand, it's always going to be in demand.
Sure. So it kind of ties in with my next question of how did you actually start in this? Do you have like any educational background in the creative field?
Yeah, so I went to the Cambridge School of Art, which is part of Anglia Ruskin University, and I did a bachelor's there in graphic design with a specialism in typography. And I was quite fortunate, really luckily. Straight after I graduated, I was given 4 job offers based off of my final major project. And one of those people happened to be somebody that I knew personally. And they were offering me quite an attractive package of only working 3 days a week. There was a lot of other things that I kind of wanted to focus on as well. So that felt like a perfect match, and also the opportunity for me to be working for myself, and kind of having that opportunity would be, I think, quite valuable. So I decided to do that, and it was on a what we call retainer basis, which is where a contractor will pay you up front, and you have a certain obligation to meet certain KPIs throughout the month, and whatever it is that you've agreed between the client as a kind of your scope of work that needs to be finished by the end of the month.
Okay, that's good. So you said that you both worked with an agency or like in the industry and freelancing. So where are you right now in your life? Are you freelancing or are you working in an agency or?
So right now I am freelancing, but I am actually at a point in my career where I am thinking about going into an agency. And the reason for that is I think there's so many pros and cons of being freelance. I mean, the main pro being you take a 360 approach to work and to life, really. You kind of have to do everything for yourself. There's not really anybody to kind of take the brunt of a difficult client where you'd normally have a project manager that would be the person in between the creative and the client. You wouldn't have a marketing director or a director that is going out and seeking business leads, or a founder that kind of takes responsibility of the whole package. So I think with that being said, you take this approach, which is brilliant, and you can transfer all of those skills into other skills in your life. Whereas in an agency, you do have the opportunity to bounce ideas off of people, which you may not have as a freelancer. It's quite an isolating experience. It's quite difficult to find people who are often willing to talk about their projects because sometimes they feel it's maybe confidential or it might not be something they're willing to share. So I guess within an agency kind of structure, you have somebody to look up to, you have a mentor within the company, you have like lots of different people to bounce ideas off, and it feels much more like a collective where it's kind of easier to facilitate that creative space. So for that reason, really, from being kind of starting freelance, going into an agency, coming out of that and going into freelance, and now for a period of nearly 4 years, I feel I'm at a point in my career where I really value that experience of an agency to a degree. And I feel that it's necessary for me to take in order to take my next step freelancing. So I definitely will return to freelancing, working for myself, but I think that there are some valuable things that I could pick up from going back into an agency. Yeah.
I don't know if you can recall. I know for myself that I have a really bad memory. So, but can you remember what was your first client, or more exactly, how did you get your first client when you were actually freelancing?
I believe it was through networking. So I think that networking is the most valuable thing that you can do as a freelancer. It's not easy. It's not something that everybody knows how to do, and it's not something that everybody is confident in doing. Like, social anxiety is a real thing, and I think that it's definitely easier to see networking as view it as a skill that needs to be learned and needs to be nurtured, and to kind of take that and practice networking, going to events. It doesn't necessarily have to be networking at an event and being there kind of physically. You can always say, for example, sometimes I've done this, I've really admired the founder of an agency or something like that, and I've just reached out to them. And I think people really appreciate that when you value their work. So tell them why you value their work. Show that you've done research by picking out certain aspects of their career. There's nothing worse than kind of meeting someone that you find is kind of inspirational to you, or however you want to look at it, and kind of meeting them and asking them questions that would have been easy to find by a Google search. You need to be like really prepared if you're going to meet someone who you consider quite valuable. But if it's networking, I guess just practice and just find those networks around you. And if you don't feel confident, maybe take a friend with you to kind of give you that boost. Or maybe see who's attending and try and connect with them. Or even reach out to the people who are hosting the networking event. Let them know that it's going to be your first time. You're not really sure what to kind of do or to expect. And most people are quite kind, and they will be willing to kind of help you and guide you through that process.
Yeah, I guess this is something more that the university started pushing on us, not exactly the university as a whole. More specifically, we have a tutor, Paul Butler, that he worked in the industry for quite a bit of time, and he kept bringing up the importance of networking, talking with people. And because I also had a bit of experience in my placement here, I can see the value of it now. But I have like lots of colleagues that are like, I'm not sure about that. I'll just focus on my portfolio, waste time trying to talk with people. I'd rather just go on these apps and then put my portfolio out there, and then someone will pick me up. But
yeah, I mean, your social capital is going to be the thing that is most valuable to you in your career, especially if you want to go on your own. Purely because if you look at how businesses work, their social capital is what is most important to them, or their sort of clientele capital. Like, oh, we just got a job with this amazing client that everybody knows because everybody recognises the brand's name. And so that for them is going to be the key to finding another big brand. And I think that's, if you look at it in the same way as being a freelancer, finding someone who is quite well connected or has done a lot of great work and can kind of point you in other directions or connect you to someone else. And that's going to be the most valuable thing.
We heard a bit about yourself and like your past. So now let's see what you're actually doing. So for someone that never heard about you, how would you summarize Saliah, the multifaceted artist?
How do I summarize it? I guess I always kind of say that I'm on a mission to show that creativity can create social impact and social change. Everything that I do is with a sense of purpose, or at least I try my best for it to be that way. Any job or client that I seek out, I always try my best to make sure that the job in hand is either just benefiting someone in some way, or solving a social problem, or solve an issue that affects society. And that's kind of the reason for that is I noticed that throughout my university career, and also just at school even, any design project that I did was always trying to deliver a message that was, the core of it was kind of trying to create social impact, make people think about what that's trying to say and what that's trying to do. And I think that, I guess that's, the reason why I say multifaceted is I freelance as a designer, but I'm also a DJ. I'm also a dancer.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of areas in my life that contribute to my creative thinking. And I've recently this year taken on a theatre project. So there's lots of areas of my work that kind of filters in and out of different mediums and different career paths. And it's been a really interesting process, but I think that's why I came down to the decision of calling myself a multifaceted artist. And, I've done many business kind of courses, short courses that talk about your 60-second pitch or your elevator pitch and that kind of thing. And I have all those that really focus on branding and brand identity, which is what I mostly do within my, design work. But then I thought, to have a pitch that kind of, an elevator pitch that discusses every single, facet of my life is quite complicated. And I think that perhaps just embodying all of these things that I do just into one, it just made sense to call myself that, a multifaceted artist. I want someone who's versatile. And that's me.
Yeah, no, I guess it's really hard to explain yourself and who am I. Well, that's a bit philosophical, but so how do you market yourself? How do you get the word out there about?
So networking, but also social media. So using myself personally, I use Instagram a lot to market myself. Funnily enough, not so much market myself as a designer, but actually more the DJing and dancing side of things, because video is much more interactive. And so I've kind of used that to my advantage. But as I said, like, how do I market myself in terms of my design stuff? Of course, I've got my portfolio, and I network a lot, and I'm involved a lot as well within the creative industry in London. So I think once you get to know the creative industry wherever you are, you realise it's very small, and you get to know who the people are that are kind of running certain things and running certain events or awards or whatever it might be. So you get yourself involved in that. And as I said, networking, word of mouth, it's the best way of, it's like guerrilla marketing. It's just like, it's just out there, and it's like you're subtly telling people that you're here. So that's how it's worked for me. The best way is a combination of using social media and networking.
Yeah, no, for me it's kind of mind-boggling that you can do, so you only have the graphic part, the design part, but you also have DJing and dancing. How do you manage to juggle all of them and actually do that, not just as a hobby, because as you were saying, you actually had jobs specifically for all of those. So how do you manage to present all of those to a professional standard?
I think that it's just understanding the skills that you learn from each of them and how they transfer into one another, and using that to your advantage. For example, with being creative, I had to do some creative direction, and that involves an understanding of movement and music, right? So I had both of those skills that I was able to transfer into my design job. Also, as working as a designer, knowing how to problem solve, I have to bring that into music much more than anything else. So knowing how to problem solve creatively and knowing how to kind of use words in copywriting, like wordplay. Wordplay is also something that is used in DJing. So it's a skill that I can transfer across as well. And dancing, you know, there's a lot of interpretation and problem solving involved there because you're listening to the music. Myself personally, I'm a body popper, so I have to I mostly just dance freestyle and interpret the music, interpret the beats. So I'm having to kind of interpret that, what the producer has done through movement. So that is almost like answering a brief, exactly the same as you would as a creative. All I'm doing is doing it through my body, whereas creative, it's much more of a physical thing. So all of these things coming together. Now, you said, how do you balance all of these things and how do you make it work for you? Well, I think you have to know which ones are working for you, right? So for me personally, it's design and DJing that are working for me the most, because they're the ones that generate a revenue. Whereas dancing is a very hard thing to make money out of. You have to sort of be in dance academies and dance schools from when you're young and kind of go into like video performances and that kind of thing. So I'd say just knowing which one's working for you. If it's working for you during a certain period of time, like for example, I know that dance works for me more in the summer. That's when the whole dance industry is just up and going again. And with DJing, again, in the summer, it's like much more. And, you know, you just kind of have to fluctuate between every single one and kind of reduce the amount that you focus on that one for a while, come back onto that one and reduce that. But always keeping one quite consistent, which I would say is the design, because that's like my comfort blanket.
I see.
Yeah.
So with so many different activities, what would you say are your USPs or unique selling points? Like why would someone hire you over someone, I wouldn't say me because, well, there is experience, but someone that has been in the field for quite a bit of time?
So again, I think it's being a creative person, it takes a lot of understanding of people. And I think with myself having been in so many different fields, and also myself as an individual, I come from I have an interesting background. I wasn't like born and raised here in the UK. I was born and raised in Kuwait. I'm half Lebanese. I'm Muslim. I'm, you know, all of these things coming together, and it gives you a much different lens on the world and how you view it. And I think that, as I mentioned, you know, like a lot of the time people will tend to hire person over skill. And that is because of just the experience that you have within your life. How do you bring that to the table as a creative? And I think that that's really, you know, we've seen so many huge advertising campaigns that have gone terribly wrong because the person that approved it has no empathy at all with, you know, like the Pepsi ad, for example. Ridiculous, like completely outrageous, disrespectful. You know, the person that approved that has no idea
Which ad are you talking about?
Where they used the Black Rights Movement
and
to sell Pepsi. Right, so you know that is not something that whoever approved that was not either involved or emotionally empathizing with the situation, or kind of, you know, you have to have diverse minds, neurodiversity, and also diverse minds and experiences. I truly believe are the key to creativity, because you've had to interpret life in a very different way to the very cliche individual. So I think that's why it's so important. Yeah, and I think that's my USP, I guess.
I think you put it quite well on your Instagram bio. You are, how's it? A shawarma of culture.
A mixed shawarma.
Mixed shawarma, yeah.
Yeah. That's obviously a very popular Lebanese dish, and I mix of everything. So yeah.
So that being said, what would be the areas, or what would you call your weaknesses?
Good question. In terms of like
Things
what.
that you might want to improve, or oh, maybe I lost this client because this person had this and I did not have that. So
I'd say a weakness of mine is, and something I'd probably advise my younger self, is not to be so afraid of failing and not to be afraid of kind of showing your work and putting it out there. I think failure is, now I'm getting older and kind of a lot more experience, I've realised that failure is the key to progression. You have to fail, but fail forward. So whereas if you're not allowing yourself to make mistakes, you're always seeking for that idea of perfection, which a lot of designers do. I think in a lot of our work, we're so critical of our own work, and it's quite hard to get lost in that. So if you're not able to make those mistakes and creative mess ups, right, so you're not going to learn, or you might even create something that you never anticipated you would create, because you were allowing yourself to be free of judgment and just exploring what it is you're capable of. So I think that something I would probably say that is something I'm continuously working on is just being much more confident to show my work and not really striving for that idea of perfection, because it's non-existent, and allowing my work to be vulnerable. I think is really key as well. Yeah,
that's okay. We heard about you, we heard about what you're doing, so now about the clients aspect. How do you build a relationship with a client, and how do you attract more clients?
So again, like mostly building a relationship with the client and finding more clients are kind of key to each other, because often the client will refer you to somebody and say, I work with this person and I can really vouch for them. They did an amazing job with me and they're really great to work with. So I would always say that do your best to kind of meet the client's requirements, but also be quite firm with your own kind of self-worth. I recently had an experience where I had a contractor that was interested in working with me, and that was because I had applied through a freelancing website, and they rang me and said, we really like the sound of you. From what you've told us, you sound brilliant, and you know what you're talking about. And they said, if we set up an interview on Monday, would you be able to prepare 3 kind of designs of what you would do for us? And I point blank refused. I said, I don't work for free. Bottom line, that's not what I do. And I think that when you've got over 6 years experience, your portfolio tells the story. And I think it's just being quite firm with clients who want to exploit creatives, to kind of see what they would do for them, and then maybe take that and go to someone else that's much cheaper and say, can you kind of carry on with this? Or ultimately your portfolio speaks words. Okay, when you're very first starting out, there might be a few instances where you're asked to do something, and I'd probably somewhat encourage it to a degree, as long as it's not pushing you out of your way too much, if it's something that you feel like truly passionate about. But otherwise, when you get kind of deep into your career, I don't think it's something you should be doing at all. So I would say, do your best to meet your clients' requirements, but also part of that relationship is a relationship is always a two-way thing. So don't allow yourself to be in a relationship that is toxic, basically, and just controls you. And it should be a very much a two-way thing where you're bouncing off each other, and just trying to find out how that client likes to work, and also negotiating that with yourself. Can I do that? Does that make me feel uncomfortable? Does that put me out of my way? How much is that going to cost me in time? Those kinds of questions you need to be asking yourself, and put down some boundaries. Yeah.
No, I really like that. And again, really good transition into my next question of how exactly, like, what's the embarking process? Because I feel like it's a bit more personal than, just like only emails and stuff. Like, was they exactly like the embarking process of like someone coming to you, and like how do you actually seal the deal? Like, how do you actually get the job?
So sealing the deal would be a combination of showing the portfolio, potentially talking through briefly about how I would approach the project, whether that's on the phone or whether that's through a physical quotation. So often what I'll do is I'll produce a quote for the client. They've come to me with certain requirements. We've had a meeting, whether that's face-to-face or by phone or by video call. I've written down all the notes about how I interpret their brief. Sometimes they'll actually send you a physical written brief. And I think that's the key part there, is how you interpret the brief when you send back the quote. When you send back the quote with the proposal and the scope of work, if that proposal and scope of work matches what the client has said, the brief, that is when you're going to secure the client. If the client reads your quote and says, actually, this seems like a really reasonable, broken down aspect of this project, the way that this person has calculated the kind of days and how long it will take, and also the proposal, like, this client wants me to do this, and produce X, Y, Z. If the client can see that you've got a firm understanding of what they're after, that's generally when they will be like, yeah, sure, let's go for it. And and I think just having that self-worth as well shows confidence in what you do. You know, like asking for 50% upfront is a general best practice for creatives. Agencies do it, so why don't freelancers? You know, this is a common practice which a lot of freelancers are stung by, because they don't realise they should be asking for money upfront. And again, the way you calculate that, if it's a relatively affordable price, you're probably going to ask for 50% upfront. If it's a large project and it's a very considerable amount of money, you split the project into 4 stages and you ask for 25% to begin with, and then you kind of declare that once we've handed this in, this is when we'll expect the next 25%. And you continue to do that. So showing those structures in the way that you quote will show the client that you know what you're doing.
So I guess it's like having confidence in yourself and just making sure that the fit between you and the client is actually like what it needs to be. But what do you do when you have a difficult client? I know it's tough out there. Let's say, your lead, not actual client, comes back to you and say, this code is outrageous, it's too much work. It costs too much. How do you deal with those situations?
Really, you have, in that situation in particular, you have to look at the reasons why you think the client might be saying that. Is it because they have a lack of understanding of how much work it actually is going to take? So they're underestimating the amount of work that it's, how much time and effort is going to have to be committed by the designer or the creative into delivering it, what it is that they want? Or is it the fact that you personally have actually misunderstood the brief and you've overestimated, you've overquoted, and you've overestimated the kind of scope of how long it will take? If that's the case, sometimes what I'll say is, okay, tell me what's your budget. If that's your budget, this is what I can do for that money. And it won't be the original quote. I'll take a significant amount out of the scope. It'll be, this is what you will get from me if you want to pay me that much. Sitting down with them maybe and explaining, this is why it's going to take this long. That's another option. Then you have to think, well, is this person just trying to get a cheap job, right? Then you can just say, sometimes I've said that myself, this is how much it costs. This is why, sometimes it's exhausting having to explain. You shouldn't have to explain why that's your worth, right? So I think that sometimes it is about making decisions to say, unfortunately, that is the final quote, that is the lowest that I can bring it down to. If you're not happy with that, then unfortunately we can't proceed. So there's many different angles that you can take with a client when it comes to finances, and it's just about really trying to analyze the situation, trying to kind of see where the client's coming from. Like, is it something to do with me, or is it something to do with the client? Sometimes it's not even worth your time trying to explain why. If we spent our whole lives trying to explain to clients why we're worth this, then we wouldn't be working. We'd just be explaining why. So,
and yeah, I guess this goes into, do you say no to your clients or potential leads?
Yes. Yeah, I have said no before, and as I said, I just said no recently to somebody who asked me to do 3 pieces of like a social media. It wouldn't have taken me long, but it's the principle.
Yeah.
Right. So there are cases where you should say no, and obviously there are certain projects that perhaps I don't share the same values as the client. I had a client once where they came to me through word of mouth, and when we were having the initial interview, or not interview per se, it was more like a meeting just to discuss the requirements. He was kind of really being quite demanding of what it is that I would offer. And, again, it's like, yes, there's only so much you can pitch, and there's only so much you can do and show. And they were also a financial company. It's not something that really connects with me. I tend to go for like social enterprises or social cause. That tends to be charities, or it tends to be like a movement of some kind. So with that, it was kind of, okay, here are some red flags, but also, am I going to be happy if I say yes? Am I going to be happy doing this work? And will I be proud of showing it at the end? Probably not. So, those are things that you also have to ask yourself. Sometimes, like agencies, for example, not a lot of people know this, but design agencies only tend to show you 10% of their work. That is it. So 90% of what they do is stuff they are not proud of. It's stuff that they have to do to keep going, right?
Yeah.
So there are some times, where you think, tonight, this is actually going to be really tough for me this month, and I think I need to make that decision to kind of take that role. But think about it from a wider, like, how is this going to benefit me in the future? Am I going to be happy doing this role? Have I got too much on? Am I in the right state? Mental health? Is it all, just take all of these factors into consideration and think about whether that role is right for you or
not. So once you got a client going, and you have the job and everything, how do you keep them happy throughout the job, and like how often do you communicate with them?
It varies with every client. So I've had clients that are incredibly full on and want to see the process so much that I've actually had a client that was much happier with me working whilst they were literally watching what I was doing on screen. Yeah. Sometimes you have those jobs, and like I said, those are sometimes decisions that you have to make. Fortunately, that was a really cool project, but it was a case of, this was a client who, this was his personal project. And it was a fantastic project, but I could sense that he really wanted to have a sense of ownership over the design. And sometimes we kind of, as designers, sometimes have to swallow our pride a little bit and think, well, if this is what makes the client completely satisfied, that they can turn around and say, that's exactly what I wanted, because they've had full agency over it. So in that case, it's worked out for me, but in other cases, how do you keep it? I mean, just constant communication, constant updates. Even if you're not ready to submit, tell them when you think you will be. Like, this has come up with this client, so I'll be able to send you this by this date. And if you do say that, then make sure you do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so always give them a deadline or an expectation, sorry, of what you're prepared to send, that you know that you'll be able to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like I said, some clients are so laid back and they just want to see something whenever you've finished.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't really have a timescale. It really depends on the project's timeline.
So as you were saying before, so how much are you actually willing to like give up or compromise? As you were saying before, maybe some clients want to have a lot of like creative direction into that. But from your point of view, that's not the best design course that the project should go. Or maybe let's say something wrong happens into the whole job. How much are you willing to actually compromise in order to keep the job, still have the client happy, and still have them as a referral afterwards?
That's a really tough question. I think
I'm asking just because I'm not saying that I'm in this industry, but like just starting, like I can feel there is a bit more of a pride of a designer. If someone tells you, well, this doesn't look good, or can we make this look like this? And then you've spent like weeks or whatever saying, okay, I want this to be this spacing. And then the client goes, yeah, can we make it smaller? And it's just like, but can we not make it smaller? So like how do you compromise that? Like how do you kind of like a balance?
Well, sometimes you can, quite often clients don't actually know what they want until they see it. That's the issue. That's the real issue here. It's because when they've seen something that you perceive as being correct, which again, design is subjective. So we have to also take that into consideration, that my idea of what's right is not the same as what's yours. So we also have to take that into, factor that in. So I think that just kind of, for example, you could say, you can show them, this is the option that you wanted, and this is the option that I think is best, and these are the reasons why, right? And then sometimes they will say, actually, yeah, I agree with you. Now that you've explained it a little bit, I agree, because it could be disastrous what they're asking you to do if it's too small. For example, for print, you really shouldn't go any less than 8 points for text. So if the client says, can you make this like way smaller, and you go, okay, well that's going to be like 6 point, and you won't be able to read it. So there's certain things that you can negotiate with the client in terms of design decisions. And then as I said, like how much are you willing to compromise? I think it really just depends on the situation, and just I think just don't ever compromise your self-worth. If it's something that just doesn't feel right to you, I mean, I just, if it just doesn't feel right, I would just say either try your best maybe to kind of complete the project, and just maybe not continue again with that client. Which is something I've done as well myself personally. I've worked with clients to keep them happy, but then decided not to work with them again. So if they've approached me, I've always kept the peace, as they say, which I've never really outwardly said this is the reasons why I wouldn't work with you again, but sometimes it really depends on the situation. It depends on sometimes you have to be careful about how big that client is as well, and just always making sure that you kind of don't compromise yourself too much.
I mean, definitely, especially if you are freelancing, or even if it's a small company, you should really take care of yourself and make sure you don't butt it out, and then just like start hating what you're actually doing.
Especially if they're asking you to do something for free. never. I would never, like, I think when I was young and naive, I'd probably do that, but never. If you've made a mistake, like I think you mentioned in your question, if you made a mistake, if something went wrong, that's different. You know, you have to go through and redeem yourself. However, once you start to see that the client is exploiting that, so kind of seeing that you're trying to redeem yourself and saying, well, can you do this, you can kind of say, well, actually, I've fixed the mistake, so now I'm not willing to go any further.
Yeah.
You know, I've redeemed myself, but I'm not willing to go further.
And after, let's say, the job is done, I'm asking this just because I know it's a bit controversial. Like, how do you actually transform the clients into advocates to like promote yourself? Because I know some companies out there, small businesses or whatever, kind of go out of the way and being like, maybe you could tell somebody about our job or stuff like that. Is it just my work speaks for me, or do you have more subtle ways of nudging someone, of like talking about you?
I mean, I wouldn't even say it's subtle. I think at the end of each project, I always ask my clients for feedback. And you can use that testimonial to your advantage. You know, plenty of agencies have their clients' testimonials on their websites, and that is literally because they've probably asked them, like, how can we get like a short paragraph from someone who is a key stakeholder in the company, to say how you felt about the job, how you felt about the finished outcome, working with us, etc., etc. And that obviously, that comes with it's the person. You know, it's really about like having that personable experience, because sure, if you were just a very skilled person but not really deeply involved with that relationship with the client, you know, you're probably going to get, just made a great logo, but not a much broader testimonial where it says something like they really listened to my brief and really answered it and came back to me, and kind of we worked together through the project, and it was a much more harmonious and collaborative experience. And those kind of fulfilling testimonials, that's what you really want, isn't it? So I think that's what you should just ask them.
Yeah. And I mean, first of all, do you keep in touch with previous clients?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah, because like, how do you do that? And is it because you want, I don't know, possible future jobs, or like, how do you keep in touch with clients?
Actually, the way that I do that usually is, especially if I'm working on a brand, once that brand has kind of gone off and on its way, I tend to keep up with them on social media, like, tweet, retweet, share, that kind of stuff, you know, because not only are you promoting your own work, but you're also promoting the client. So you're getting, you know, it's a great way of showing the client that you're supporting their new look, and also being confident of your work. And just like every now and again, I sometimes, especially with the clients that I've had long term, you do reach out every now and again and just say, hey, how are things, you know, because it just kind of reminds them that you're there. And they might need you, or they might say, oh, actually, I was speaking to a friend and they were looking for a designer. You know, you've just reminded me about, you know, that sort of, it always happens that way as well. So just touching base, I think, just like saying, hey, just touching base and seeing how things are and how everything's coming along. And just reminding, I guess, that especially when you're working on brand identities, brand identities are never something that is completely, you know, some people do literally see a brand guideline as like the Bible. But I always tell my clients that a brand is something that evolves with you, and naturally businesses will pivot in their mission or in their objectives. The brand may also pivot slightly. So I think it's also important to ask the clients to kind of embrace change and just see how things are going along and seeing if they're okay with everything. if the brand toolkit is still working for them, or if anything's changed, and they might need you to come in again and say, actually, we've changed a few things internally. We wonder if it reflects on the guidelines.
Yeah, and I guess it's really good to check up with the original designer of the brand. But yeah, no, I find it funny because sometimes clients or like companies are so fixed on the brand guidelines, as you were saying, like the Bible. But like if you think about it, even the Bible had some like corrections or it's been changed over the time. So you shouldn't be. I mean, you should be attached to your brand, but you still need to adapt to the maybe your base of like customers changed, or maybe something in the technology happened, and you have to adapt.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now, but like, I don't want to just say future plan, but like, I'm just curious if you want to tell me, of course, what was the worst client that you had, and how did you deal with them?
I think the worst client that I've had is, I think we always have to factor in, why is there a client that's been bad for us? Sometimes it's actually looking at the way that we work as well. I would say that for me personally, I think that I'm very kind of trusting, I'm very open. I trust people easily. And that's because I hope that people view me the same way. They can trust me easily to do the work and to commit to something that's top quality, because that is how I feel as a individual, as a designer, or as a creative. I always give it my all. I think the worst client, I think, is somebody that eventually didn't pay me for a lot of work, and that's kind of, again, slightly my fault, due to the fact that I was trusting him in terms of he kept telling me that there was delays on investment from investors that he had secured. So I was going by his word, but there were many other factors. The fact that he was on a quite reputable tech for good incubator, accelerator program that supports founders. So I was in this space with a lot of big people in the tech industry, and this is not the first time that this happens in the startup world. It's quite common, especially in like Silicon Valley and stuff like that. Exploitation of people, creatives in particular. So I would say, there were many factors involved in that, why the client was the worst client. It was also to do with, yes, I had a contract. However, this was the first time that I'd ever worked this way, where I was relying on a contract and not a retainer. As I said, when I first ever started freelancing, a retainer transfers you the money up front. And also when I quote, it's always 25 or 50% upfront. So there's never any issue in between. This was much more like, yes, I'm a contractor, but actually starting a transition into an employee, because I was very passionate about this, about the startup. So I'd say, why were they the worst client? Yes, they were the worst because they completely exploited not just only me, but 6 other people within the startup, by purely not telling the truth about their funding situation, and encouraging us to continue to work because they were expecting the payment at this date, when that was all based on lies. So yes, the contract was there, but then you get into some sticky legal situations, and if you don't have insurance, which I didn't realise until recently actually, that sole traders can kind of have good affordable insurance, not unlike business insurance. So, yes, worst client, but always learning curve. It kind of lets you know who you're going to work for in the future. Look out for those red flags. Get insured 100%. It doesn't cover the loss of payment or loss of salary, but it does cover legal, lawyers getting involved in stuff like that, which is often unaffordable. It covers equipment being broken or anything like that and public liability. It also covers something called indemnity, which is if you've made a mistake that has cost the client, the insurance will cover that money. So that is so important, which I think a lot of sole traders don't realise is out there. So I'd encourage everyone to go out there and try and get insurance. Especially businesses, if, for example, the client had business insurance, his business insurance would have paid for my debt. So it would have paid me, but he didn't.
That sounds terrible. But on a brighter side, if you were to talk with, I guess I fall into that category, someone that just starts into this industry, someone that just finished with you, what would be your top 3 qualities or advice that you'd give to someone starting? If you could possibly look into that camera, that would be great.
Sure. So the top 3 pieces of advice that I could give to someone starting out, first one would be courage. Have confidence in your work and have confidence to network and talk about your work and talk about yourself. So courage is key. Persistence. Always persist. Never take kind of the first step of failure as a reason for you to take a step back. Continue moving forward. Also, in terms of networking, again, it takes persistence. It takes patience and persistence. So you need to be persisting with that person, whoever it is you're trying to reach or whatever it is you want to do, whichever goal, continue to try and find ways of reaching that goal. And the final one is knowledge. Knowledge is absolute power. There is nothing more powerful than knowledge. So read about all the current latest, everything that is happening in the world, also in the creative industry. Read books that experts have written, listen to podcasts, keep yourself up to date with the most, recent topics in the creative industry, but also just around the world as well. I think that's really important and it will always fuel what you do. So yeah, courage, persistence and knowledge.
That's great. I will listen to that advice myself. So what's your plan or what's happening with you? Do you have any plans for the future? Anything interesting going on? Is there any vision or something that you want to go towards?
Yeah, definitely. So my ultimate goal is to be a creative director. And I actually met with the BBC, the creative director of the BBC TV studios. And she asked me this question, why do you want to be a creative director? And I think it only, actually, when I was trying to answer her there and then, I was struggling to answer that question. But now that I've thought about it, it's actually, I've realised because of my range of experiences, the way that I can interpret a lot of different things and also see life through a very different lens. So it's kind of, that unifying of many different aspects of your life is in the same way how you would unify a team together. Also just admitting what is your strong points. I know my strong point is not a finishing art worker. That's not my strong point. I know my strong point is ideas and creating and facilitating a space for someone to feel like they can generate more ideas. So it's just, those are the reasons why I would love to be a creative director. So now what I'm doing is carving my path towards that. So that's, as I said, negotiating lots of meetings. I met with the creative director of the BBC, a director at a huge company, McKinsey & Company, just reaching out to my contacts and asking questions. Don't be afraid to ask, just ask. And as I said, knowledge is so important. If there's something that you are trying to find out a little bit more on, see if there's any books or podcasts out there about that journey, about that experience to help you get there. And also I've started music production. So I started college last week. So like I say, knowledge is power. Always go back and always learn. And my goal is to play one of my tracks this year, whether that be in a small club or a massive festival. I don't know which one. Hopefully the festival. But, those are my plans, kind of focusing on carving my career to becoming a creative director and also producing music.
No, it's been a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank
Is
you.
there anything that you think I might have missed, or just something that you'd like to add?
I think just as a final pointer is just that reiteration of freelancers not thinking enough about themselves as a business. There are many things that you can do out there that are called business canvas models, which kind of encourages you to review yourself and what it is that you do and what it is you bring to the table. So I'd recommend doing one of those every 3 to 6 months. Looking at yourself as a business, like financially, if you want 30 days off in a year, figure out how much you have to charge clients to have 30 days off in a year. That's, think about yourself, forecast, always make those decisions. And I don't think freelancers think about themselves enough like that. And insurance, get insured. So that's I think the kind of overall closing line would be just think about yourself more as a business.
No, I think I actually know quite a couple of people that would be really interested in like hearing your advice, or just like in general, like looking up to you. So
thank you.
So this has been Saliah Bryan. If someone wants to get in touch with you or in contact with you, what would be the best way?
Instagram would be great. Saliahgram. Go ahead and follow me on there and see what I'm doing on there. So it's SALIAH gram. Or an email, saliahbryan@outlook.com is fine as well. Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you.